On Easter Sunday morning, the very first person that Jesus showed himself to at the resurrection was not a disciple, was not one of his 12 followers. He showed himself, first of all, the first person who saw Jesus alive was a woman named Mary Magdalene. Now, Mary Magdalene had quite a different story. All of her life, Mary just wanted to be loved. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, just wanting to be loved. Everybody wants just to be loved, to be valued, to be respected, to have dignity, to feel like somebody cares about us. Mary just wanted to be loved. Unfortunately, she tended to look in all the wrong places. And as a result, it left her wide open to be abused and to be misused. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Men used her and men abused her. You might say she was unlucky at love because she went from one failed relationship to the next and she couldn't figure out, what am I doing wrong? I just want to be loved. But she goes from one relationship to the next, being hurt. And all of these men broke her heart until one day she meets a man named Jesus Christ. And for the first time, there's a man in her life who treats her with dignity, treats her with respect, cares more about her than just her body. He loves her the way she'd always wanted to be loved. He loves her unconditionally. He loves her completely. He loves her regardless of her faults and failures and mistakes. He just loves her. And Jesus didn't just love her, he liberated her. He set her free from habits and hurts and hang-ups that messed up her life. He set her free from addictions and abuses, from patterns and habits that kept her stuck in one bad relationship after another. He set her free. He liberated her from the demons of her past that haunted her. So when Jesus was crucified on the cross, all of the disciples left him. They all ran and hid, except one, John. And the only people who showed up at the crucifixion were the women in Jesus' life. Mary, his mother, his aunt, Salome, Mary Magdalene, this woman we're talking about right now, she was at the foot of the cross with Jesus' mother. So she saw Jesus brutally murdered. Because it was a Sabbath, Jewish law didn't allow them to prepare the body for burial. They had to just stick it in the grave. And the next morning, she goes to the grave to anoint it with the spices that they did in the Middle East in those days. Now, in those days, they didn't bury people in the ground. Graves were caves in the side of the mountain that they would dig out of limestone, and they would often have many, many people buried in them. This was a grave that had never been used, owned by a very wealthy man who volunteered to let Jesus have it. He figured Jesus wouldn't need it very long. And so on Sunday morning, Mary goes to the tomb. She gets up early. It's still dark. And the Bible says this. It's there on your outline. The Bible tells us from the book of John, Mary Magdalene stood crying outside the tomb. While she was still crying, she bent and looked into the tomb and saw two angels dressed in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" And she said, "They've taken away my Lord. I don't know where they put him." Then she, Mary, turned around and she saw a man standing there. But she didn't recognize that it was Jesus. "Woman, why are you crying?" Jesus asked her. "Who are you looking for?" She thought he was the gardener, so she said to him, "If you took him away, sir, tell me where you've put his body, and I'll go and I'll get him." Then Jesus simply said to her, One word, Mary. He just calls out her name, Mary. She turned toward him and she said in Hebrew, Rabboni, which means teacher. And then Mary ran and found the disciples and said, I have seen the Lord. Now Jesus asked Mary two very important questions. Why are you crying and what are you looking for? Why was Mary crying? Well, it was obvious. She was grieving a loss. She'd seen Jesus be murdered, and she's grieving the loss of the only person who ever loved her unconditionally. The Bible says it was still dark, but it wasn't just physically dark. She was still in the dark about the resurrection. She didn't know Jesus had come back to life. In fact, she didn't realize how close she was to Jesus. He was standing right there with her. When you're grieving, when you've had a loss, you often don't think clearly and see clearly. It clouds our vision. It limits our perspective. If you've lost a job, you've lost a loved one, you've lost a dream, you've had any major loss in your life, your vision isn't that clear. God was standing right by her and she didn't even see it. When you're going through the dark, Jesus is standing right next to you. You often can't see him because it clouds our vision. And Mary thinks it's hopeless. She's saying, it's over. He's dead. It's finished. He isn't coming back. But Jesus changes everything with one single word. He doesn't give her a big sermon. He just says one word. He calls out her name, Mary. Mary. You know, when you love somebody, all you have to do is hear their voice and you know who it is. If my wife calls me on the phone and she says, Rick, I don't say, who's this? I know my wife's voice. And if I call my kids or I call my wife and I say their name, they don't go, who is this? They know it's Daddy or it's my husband. So Jesus says, Mary. And in one word, he's saying, it's me. I know who you are. I know you by name. I know where you're hurting. I care about that pain, and I can do something about it. All that by just saying, Mary. And Jesus Christ says the same thing to you today. I don't know where you're hurting, but he's saying to you, I know who you are. I know your name. I know where you're hurting, and I can do something about it. The first thing I want you to get this Easter is this. It's never too late for a miracle. It is never too late for a miracle. Even death doesn't mean it's over. It's never too late. The Bible says in Luke 18:27, there on your outline, what is impossible for people to do is possible for God. What is it in your life you're saying right now, that's impossible, never gonna happen? It's over, it's dead, it's done, it isn't gonna happen. Well, every time you use the word impossible, listen for laughter from heaven, because it's not in God's vocabulary. You know, if you were to go to my office and pull out my dictionary and look up the word impossible, you would find that it's not in my dictionary because I cut it out. Because the Bible says all things are possible with God, and if it's not in God's vocabulary, it's not in mine. This Easter, I'd like to ask you, whether you're up high or here in the middle or down low, wherever you are, I want to ask you the two questions Jesus asked Mary. What are you grieving over? And what are you looking for? What makes you sad? What causes you disappointment? What has caused grief in your life? Where's the big loss in your life that when you think about it, you can get a little melancholy, you can get a little sad about it? The loss of a job, the loss of a friend, the loss of a dream. And what are you looking for? What do you think will make you happy? What do you think is going to meet all your needs? What do you think is going to take away your pain? What do you think is going to heal that hole in your heart? If the answer is anything besides God, I want to respectfully submit to you, you're going to be disappointed once again. Now, regardless of who you are, regardless of what you've done, regardless of how many relational failures you've had, Jesus says to you, like he says to Mary, I know who you are. I know your name. I care about what you're going through. It's never too late for a miracle. It's not hopeless. And I will be your healer.